From AmeriVet Securities, a service-disabled, veteran-owned broker-dealer in New York City, we bring you Compass Check, a podcast created by veterans for veterans. The military uses a compass to navigate air, land, and sea. Now, Compass Check is here to help you navigate your transition into the corporate workforce. Our goal is to reach military veterans and members of the veteran community, empower and connect them with a multitude of resources that will ultimately set them up for success after leaving the military. I'm your host, Army veteran James Fitzgerald. Let's get moving. Student Veterans of America, also called SVA, is a 501c3 nonprofit organization focused on addressing the needs and concerns of military veterans and family members in higher education. With a focused mission on empowering student veterans, SVA is committed to providing an educational experience that goes beyond the classroom. Through a dedicated network of more than 1,500 on-campus chapters in all 50 states and 4 countries representing more than 750,000 student veterans, SVA aims to inspire yesterday's warriors by connecting student veterans with a community of like-minded chapter leaders to assist the transition out of the military into the classroom. The local SVA chapters are student groups that have formed on college and university campuses to provide peer-to-peer networks for veterans who are attending those schools. Each chapter is designed to be an advocate for student veterans in their community and to help bridge the campus-to-career transition. They coordinate on-campus and community outreach activities, facilitate pre-professional networking, and provide a touchstone for student veterans in higher education. My guest today is Student Veterans of America President and CEO, Jared Lyon. Here's our conversation. School may be out for summer, but class is in session today as I have Jared Lyon, President, CEO of Student Veterans of America, here to school me and give me a masterclass on what's available to transitioning service members that are leaving the armed forces, entering the corporate workforce, but also colleges and universities across the country. Jared, it's a pleasure.
James, thanks so much for having me, man. And I'd be remiss if right up at the front I didn't thank you for just everything that you do on behalf of our veteran military connected and our family community nationwide, from student leadership to your work at the White House to quite literally leading at the city level and now in financial services, man. Just your passion for our population inspires the heck out of me, and I'm just glad to be here today.
More about me. No.
You got it. Hang on. I got another list.
What I'd like to do is provide an opportunity for those who don't know. Student Veterans of America has a marvelous superhero origin story, and you have donned the cape today to provide that story. So please paint the picture for us of the background of SVA and how we've gotten to this point today.
Yeah, no doubt. And I don't mind donning the cape, but I'll provide clarity as the storyteller. I'm not a founder of SVA, though I have been involved since our early days. So Student Veterans of America is getting ready to celebrate our 15th birthday this January. So quite literally, we got our start officially in 2008. But the real story of SVA starts a couple of years prior to that origin date. And that's when student veterans were coming home primarily from Iraq and Afghanistan. They were getting ready to head back to school. And they were using something called the Montgomery GI Bill. And, these student veterans are far smarter than I was. And they were looking back through history, going all the way back to the original Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944, what is broadly known as the original GI Bill. When you look back at that original piece of legislation, it's important to sort of remember that not only did the American government look a little different back then, the population of America looked a little bit different back then. And notwithstanding, the original GI Bill, we associate it today with education and training. But that original GI Bill was sort of all encompassing of military transition. So certainly it provided the opportunity for World War II veterans on their return home for education and training, but it also had unemployment compensation. It had farm subsidies, the ability to purchase a home, a vehicle, small business loans. I mean, really everything that we associate with transition today in the Department of Veterans Affairs and a national network of nonprofits was really put into that original GI Bill. The other thing to note too is that the equity of that original GI Bill was only as good as America was back then, and so there were a lot of folks that were sort of left out. I mean, in earnest, if you didn't look like me, sort of a white, straight, cisgendered dude, the GI Bill was available in pockets and fits and starts. But that original GI Bill, as it pertains to education and training, the veteran was eligible for it and could access it. It covered, their full tuition, their fees, a housing stipend, a book stipend, etc. And it was really designed for a transitioning service member to, when they access the benefit, do nothing else but go to school as quickly as they can. Uh, so these student veterans in 2006 and 7, they were looking back on that original GI Bill, and they understood some key elements to it. First and foremost, something that we forget to history, but the original GI Bill was designed after the war for World War II veterans, meaning that after Korea, the next conflict that would come after World War II, the Korean War veterans were not eligible for the original GI Bill. So Congress had to pass a new law. Then we fast forward to Vietnam, right? And Congress was working on the precedent that before we could pass legislation for this next generation of warfighters, we had to wait for the war to end. But Vietnam at that time was the longest period of conflict in America's history before our generation's conflict. And so Congress sort of just was waiting for it to end before they passed the legislation. And it's not entirely fair. There were little elements of things that sort of came out of Congress, but nothing as comprehensive as previous generations for Vietnam. So, student veterans of America, as we were coming home from Iraq and Afghanistan, we're looking back on this history and we're realizing that the Montgomery GI Bill, though generous, was designed as a peacetime benefit. And we were a wartime generation. And we were lucky because there were two U.S. senators in Congress at the time, both Vietnam veterans, one enlisted, one officer, one Army, one Marine Corps, both combat arms. And their names were Jim Webb and Chuck Hagel. And these two Vietnam veterans, looking at our generation, held a motto that has really inspired Vietnam veterans of America, and I think held true with a lot of post 9/11 groups, and that is that never again will one generation leave behind or abandon another. And so this idea was born by Vietnam veterans of a new GI Bill for a new generation of veterans. And that's really where Student Veterans of America got its start, at the grassroots advocacy arena. Quite literally, we started to mobilize ourselves via social media. Sort of hate to teach myself entirely, but we got our start on MySpace primarily. So
Oh, wow.
not sure if you or any of your listeners are still friends with Tom, but quite literally, that's how we got our origins, and we moved from social media onto epic conference calls. And this is back in the day where you used to have to pay for conference call lines by the minute, if you can recall. And we would have these long conversations after class and work schedules and family schedules allowed, so often late into the night, and just sort of talking about how we could start mobilizing student veterans in key districts around the United States so that our voices could be heard by the members of Congress who would be making the decisions about benefits, not just for our generation, but for all of the generations that would come uh, behind us, as well as our families. And that's really where SVA got its start. So in 2008, we thought it a good idea to get all of these student veterans that have been mostly interacting on social media and conference calls, but get us together in person. So SVA held its first national conference in 2008, a tradition that we've kept every year since. And in those early days, we had about 23 chapters came together from 16 states, in total about 70 or 80 of us. So when I say national conference, it sounds bigger than it was. Just a group of dedicated, motivated student veterans who came together. And among so many conversations that happened over those first 3 days, among the two most powerful were the decisions to unite under one banner, determine SVA's name, and figure out the mission of the organization. And so those 23 chapters came together to form Student Veterans of America. And really, James, what's kind of neat is this wasn't the first time in American veteran history, if you will, that student veterans had united under one banner to form a national organization. Happened after World War II, and that group lasted about 7 years. Then again, it happened after Vietnam, and that group lasted just about 7 years. So as SVA comes up on our 15th birthday, we've sort of doubled the national average for length of time of national student organization, and we're poised for good growth and success into the future on behalf of our nation's student veterans. But we've grown from those first 23 chapters to now a national network of 1,534 college and university campus chapters in all 50 states, U.S. territories, and then 3 countries overseas. Where SBA operates a chapter through our volunteer leaders, there are just north of 754,000 current student veterans attending those campuses. So, any way you slice it, SVA has sort of positioned itself as a unique landing spot for the most common way that the post 9/11 generation transitions out of the military, and that's actually heading to college and university campuses. So that's kind of the origin.
Yeah. Everything about that is incredible. I want to lean back on something that you had mentioned earlier as
Please.
you're describing the timeline from World War II to the Korean War. The American dream is based on social mobility. And the GI Bill was envisioned as the keys to the door leading to that future. Whatever that future is determined by the key holder. The GI Bill to this day, through the transformations in policy and legislation, has morphed into something a little bit stronger. And due to the advocacy work of Student Veterans of America, we have a totally different animal that we're faced with now as we transition out of the military. What I'd like to hone in on is everything that's being asked by that transitioning service member, the military spouse, the family members, the adult children. What is the programming for SVA like, and how can we connect? We'll start with the types of programming that are available on the chapter locations. If you can just give us a quick taste on what that looks like, and then we'll take a look at some of the other locations that SVA is operating on as well.
Yeah, James. No, I appreciate that. And really, the thing to think about with Student Veterans of America is any of the success that may be attributed to our mission. The key component of it is that we didn't do any of it alone. Certainly not without the strength of our chapters nationwide, and definitely not without great other veteran serving organizations of the post 9/11 flavor, but also the legacy organizations that have been around, some of them 100+ years. As we've kind of moved out, what we've embraced is this notion of veteran inclusion. And so as we start looking throughout higher education, we have certainly not forgotten where we came from as an organization, and we've definitely not left our roots behind. I use the word grassroots advocates for certain, but others might say rabble rousers, and that's a good thing. Showing up somewhere and understanding not just your own personal experience, but the experience of those around you, be they military connected, they might be active duty, and students on campus. They could be serving currently in the Guard or Reserve, or they could be veterans. They've separated from any of their time in uniform, and they're there. But then it's also the family members of all of those categories of service members, as well as veterans, and the survivors. Those that have been left behind. Certainly, when those categories either perish in service to country or post military life. So what you start looking at is an incredibly diverse group of lived experience throughout that population. And at the heart of all of it for our mission is the SVA chapter. Quite literally, when we teach in our programs and services that are primarily directed towards our volunteer chapter leaders, what we look at is campus culture. Because understanding what works at a school in New York City might have a lot of relevance to a school in Kentucky, but it might have as much relevance to a school in Hawaii or Alaska, even. Right. And as we look at the geography, the diversity of geography in which student veterans attend campus, we also look at the diversity of the campus, its makeup, whether it's a commuter campus, more of a residential campus, whether it's a research institution or a school in which that might have a focus on the trades. But anywhere you kind of look, at the heart of SVA is its chapter. And so when we start thinking about chapter programming, ultimately what you're looking at is think of veteran organizations that you might have stronger historical sense of their existing, maybe a longer standing brand recognizability. That might be groups like the Veterans of Foreign Wars, the American Legion, Disabled American Veterans, whatever it might be. A lot of those organizations certainly have their national headquarters. They have their legislative affairs and policy teams that are located in DC. And then, really, at the end of the day, they have their chapters, or what they call them as posts. SVA sort of found its original organizing strategy under that legacy. But at the end of the day, James, you know this better than most. All politics is local. Really, all life is local, right? All life for those local interactions. And as we've started to organize ourselves over these last 15 years on college and university campuses to give it a connection towards corporate America, in corporate America, we have what we call, not universally, but broadly, employee resource groups. You know, not every corporation is like AmeriVet Securities, in which 51% of the workforce is veterans. In a lot of companies, we make up a smaller group, or what some might refer to as a minority population within that company. But it's not just veteran employee resource groups. It might be women or LGBTQ plus groups, or employees with disabilities. But anyway, we slice it, when we think about the university campus, the SVA chapter is akin in very much kind of direct relation of an employee resource group. We're just a group of veterans, military connected students, and the families of all of those categories coming together, understanding our campus culture, and trying to be the change we want to see at that local level.
Let me hop in on that campus location conversation point, because I felt attacked just for a second when you had mentioned New York. I thought you were coming for me, since I
No.
went to a City University of New York school. I went to Medgar Evers College, who has a robust SVA chapter program. And I'm going to give them a shout out because they do excellent work. They're a previous national chapter winner. Am I wrong?
So they were one of our top 5 chapters of the year.
Eventually, we'll be number one. We're already number one back here in New York, but that's not the purpose of today's conversation, to talk about how great Medgar Evers College is, but also the SVA chapter and the strength in Brooklyn. Go Brooklyn, go Medgar Evers. What I like to present to our audience that are tuning in now, some contact information. Studentveterans.org is the website. Is there anything additional when it comes to applications, anything to that respect that is also a resource that they can tap into?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're getting out of the military, just to throw some statistics at it, generally speaking, I think a lot of us that do work with veteran advocacy have been misciting a number that sort of skews our understanding of the population. We keep saying that, on average, about 200,000 veterans are produced every year, right? The input of veterans is the throughput from the military. So once you separate from the military, it becomes a veteran. Um, James, we haven't produced 200,000 veterans as a country in 5 years. And so we actually produce a lot less veterans than we once did. So one thing that you can look at with the U.S. military is that it is one of the most lethal fighting forces for freedom and democracy that the world has ever known. If not, I would argue, I'm biased, I'll acknowledge my bias, the most lethal fighting for freedom and democracy. But let's use a business term for lethality, right? If we were going to use a word in business terminology, we would use efficient, right? And efficiency, translated roughly, is less people, less equipment, less, right? So the more lethal we can be is honestly going to be a smaller force. So unless we increase the force again, which we very well may, but for the time being, it's small. But what's interesting is that over that same 5 year average, approximately 120,000 veterans have turned on their VA education benefits. And so when you think about it, if you're someone getting out of the military, the first thing that I'd want you to know is that if you're thinking about school, you're not in the minority on that thought. And a lot of us, especially those like myself, like you, James, that have that prior enlisted experience, we might be thinking to ourselves that, geez, not a lot of folks like me go to college. Well, nation, just over 67% of all veterans in college right now, they're just like myself, the first person in their family to ever go to school. I should clarify, my baby sister went to school before me, but she only finished a bachelor's degree and doesn't have a master's. So take that.
Oh, sibling rivalry. I love
Yeah,
it.
a little bit. But the most common way that our generation is separating from the military is through higher education. And if we think about that, sort of the front door to that educational journey is going to be community college. So nearly 2/3 of all veterans that complete their bachelor's degree, they get their start, much like I did, much like you did, at a community college. Mine was Brevard Community College, which now is Eastern Florida State College in Florida. Before I eventually transferred to Florida State, much like you, before going to
Mm.
a fantastic CUNY, by the way. And the thing to know is that this is really common, but navigating that entirety of not just your benefits with the VA, with the state, down to the county, and in many cases, the very city in which you're residing. But we should know that actually the majority of people that separate from active duty are pretty much going to do one of two things when they get out of the military. They're going to return home to where they're from or where their significant other is from. And we've got to understand that family dynamic is broad, especially for those that are younger, right? We can't just say spouse. Spouses are important. I include them as well. But we have to say partner. We've got to say significant other, because we might have boyfriends or girlfriends or partners that we live with. The definitions are broad, so we've got to be broad so that we can be inclusive. But we're going to return home to where we're from or where our significant other is from. And when we do that, within 7 months of returning home, we're probably going to be in a classroom. And that can feel a little foreign for so many reasons. Think about your first deployment, James, and anybody who's, whether
Hmm.
or just moved states or duty stations, be that abroad or in the continental United States. Anyone senior above you has never sort of said, "Hey, make sure when you get there, you stick out like a sore thumb." We talk about assimilation. We talk about the understanding of the new culture that I've found myself. Well, keep in mind that that landing spot for you is an SVA chapter. And when you first show up onto campus, that group of volunteer student veterans, military connected students, family members, supporters, and allies are there for you. That's a group that, when you're first showing up and feeling like you're sticking out a little bit like a sore thumb, and maybe you feel like I did that, geez, my first 2 weeks at a large state school, and I felt like, geez, I made the biggest mistake of my life coming back to college at 28 years old. This is
Yeah.
so much older and I feel so much different in the sense of life experience. And, frankly, I feel like I might not fit in. If you're feeling that, the place to mitigate that feeling is the SVA chapter. And the place to get connected to some of those local opportunities, be they at the city level, the county level, or in your state, is likely going to be that SVA chapter who partners with whatever formalized support your campus may have, but also out into the local community. So other veteran serving organizations that might post 9/11 specific, like Team Red, White, and Blue, the Mission Continues, Team Rubicon. But it's also going to be great organizations like the Veterans of Foreign Wars, the American Legion, Disabled American Veterans, et cetera, et cetera. That SVA chapter is your hub, that place that you can come and sort of take the blinders off a little bit and understand that, yes, school is your new mission, but getting involved on campus is how you build that network. And even, this might be controversial, getting involved beyond just veterans, find
Yes.
student organizations that you can integrate with and start leading the way, much like you did while you were in uniform.
That was a lot of the conversation that wasn't provided as I was transitioning out, or even after I had landed in New York, was really trying to figure out what I'm interested in, not what I'm thinking needs to be done for someone else to say, I'm worthy, you're qualified, you're eligible, you're this, instead of looking inside and say, what do I want to do with this one life that I have to live? It took me a little bit longer than I would have liked, but everyone walks the journey at their own pace. For me, it was connecting with my SVA chapter on the first campus that I went to at a CUNY school, Bronx Community College. It was that pipeline that connected me to my community, gave me a new lens to view the world, but it started me on a journey that I never foresaw in the beginning, not only in education, but in knowing my veteran community, started connecting with other veteran servant organizations that are providing those resources that help make things a little bit easier. They don't solve all the problems. And I think that's exactly what you're communicating with SVA and the chapter locations. You're going to get a different flavor of chicken at each KFC location, but the recipe is still going to be the same. We're going to bring you in, we're going to hold you close, we're going to tell you all the information that's out there, and then we're going to provide you with a pathway to reach whatever goals that you have set for yourself. Connecting with that community is going to be the thread that I'm going to stay on now. And also, you brought up a variety of organizations that are out there for the veteran community, some longer than others. Veterans of Foreign Wars. There's a very unique partnership that's currently available that's happening between the VFW and SVA. It's a legislative fellowship. And shortly after this, because me and you are both history nerds, we're going to talk a little bit about how that connection with something like this legislative fellowship can translate into getting active in your community today. So give us an introduction to the legislative fellowship, and then we'll touch on our last piece, which is going to be that connection to your community.
Yeah, no doubt, James. And so, if you think about origin stories, it's always helpful to understand a philosophy. And our philosophy is that wherever decisions are being made, those impacted by the decision should be part of the conversation. And when we think about student veterans in particular, we think about student activism, we think about student involvement, we think about student advocacy. And it's really important. And that exploded in the 1960s and 1970s on America's college and university campuses, in which students really got involved. But, I'd say that it goes back to the 1940s and the 1950s when we had student veterans returning home from World War II, coming home, starting student veteran organizations on their campus, getting involved, getting excited. If time allows, I'd love to share with you just a personal hero of my own about Medgar Evers doing that. When
Please.
he returned home from World War II, this is a guy that was born in segregated Mississippi in 1925, goes off to serve in the Army, literally storms the beaches of Normandy, but in a segregated unit, and comes back home as a combat veteran and wants nothing more than to go to the best school in his home state, which is Ole Miss, but is denied based on the color of his skin, despite having eligibility for the GI Bill. So, like a lot of veterans of color of his era in World War II, he took his talents to an HBCU at the time called Alcorn College, now Alcorn State University. He got super involved when he was there, vice president of his class. He was part of drama, ran track and field, played football, literally sang in the choir, and met the woman of his dreams and started his family there. But it wasn't until he graduated and then the Supreme Court decision of Brown versus Board of Education, that he saw a new opportunity to try to reapply to Ole Miss, this time to go to law school. And again, as you might have guessed it, Mississippi denied him despite the Supreme Court decision. And that can be topical in so many levels. And we find ourselves even here in modern times thinking about Supreme Court decisions. But, he used this as a test case with the NAACP, became the first field organizer for the NAACP in Mississippi. And he would be responsible for helping a fellow veteran, James Meredith, become the first Black student as an undergraduate at Ole Miss and in the 50s. And that all started when he was a student advocate, and he would dedicate the remainder of his life. Unfortunately, he was assassinated at the age of 37, cut down way too soon. But when I look at Medgar Evers' story, I see, the power of leveraging your voice and making sure that we have a seat at the table in every room where decisions are being made about us. And the VFW SVA Legislative Fellowship is really that. We allow for 10 student veterans that are currently in an SVA chapter anywhere in the world, and also members of the VFW. It's a super competitive application process, but if you get selected, you're paired with a mentor, advocate mentor, legislative mentor with the VFW and Student Veterans of America in our DC offices. You work on a semester-long advocacy project, and then you come to DC during the VFW's Washington Week, and you quite literally advocate for your idea. James, I can't count on two hands how many policy ideas that originated from student veterans, and not just about student veteran issues, but about veteran issues broadly, that these legislative fellows, in partnership with the VFW and Student Veterans of America over the past 8 years, have made into law. One of them just a few weeks ago. And so when you look at that ability to sort of understand what's next in being in rooms where decisions are being made about you, they should be made with you. And think about that for networking as well. When we come back to campus as new student veterans, I offer a statistic for your listeners. Think about this. 85% of all jobs in the United States don't come from job boards. They don't come from submitting your resume or applying. 85% of all jobs in the US come through someone you know. They come through your network, right? And if you think about it even further, 70% of all jobs available right now on the market are never published. So that network that you form is important, and it should be as diverse and rich as the society in which we live and function. And so if you think that the word networking is synonymous with brown nosing, let me tell you it's not, right? And I get it. We come from a merit-based culture in uniform. It's still merited to get to know everyone. And that means your fellow veterans, military connected students, family members, supporters, and allies, but it also means traditional students. This is the first time in American history where only 1 in 3 college students state that they know a military veteran firsthand. That means that no one in their family served in the military. Shoot, man, no one in their neighborhood served in the military. And so, as student veterans, we have an opportunity, and I dare near say an obligation, to get to know those traditional students that might have no direct experience with the military. And in so doing, help to bridge the gap between the civilian population's understanding of veterans and veterans' understanding of the civilian population. So doing, diversifying and enriching our personal networks.
You just took me to church, and there are so many figures that are running through my mind, but just on the veteran bridge to the civilian component, an individual like Medgar Evers is that perfect example.
Yes,
Not
sir.
only a civil rights leader, but also a veteran of our armed forces, fighting for rights that sometimes were not extended to him or his family. So just looking at that leadership, that determination, that hope for change. His story overall was a large portion of why I did go to Medgar Evers College. It's the only predominantly Black institution in the CUNY system. For me, it was a point of privilege to step inside of those classrooms and learn from these bright minds. But I truly got the spark ignited when I stepped through Medgar Evers, and I, for the first time, understood what so many people had felt when it came to pride about where you went to school and your college experiences. I understand so much better now what they mean. And SVA is that vehicle that can help others also have that feeling. So unfortunately, we're short on time. I have just enough left to provide, you know, an opportunity for you to tell us about the social media handles where people can check you out. Like I'm all over the gram. Let's Twitter this up with some handles. Like provide us the information that our listeners need to know.
No doubt. You can find us pretty much anywhere social media is consumed at Student Vets, typically. And in addition, you connect with me on LinkedIn if you're making that transition. It's a really great professional platform that you don't have to wait until you're ready for the job search. Back to that notion. 85% of the jobs in this country are going to come through someone we know. So you can never start too soon building that network and making sure that that network is as inclusive as possible toward where you're looking, which is a bright future. Veterans are thriving in this country. And if you're new to being a veteran early in your transition, don't just get involved with organizations like Student Veterans of America. Branch out, explore your interests, and figure out what's next. Because at every point in American history where we've needed problem solvers and helpers, it has always been a generation of educated veterans who have answered the call. You're part of that legacy, and your future couldn't be more bright.
What I say to each and every single transitioning veteran and their family members, we've been waiting for you. How can we help?
I love that.
With that, it's been incredible to have this conversation with you. This has been a masterclass on what transitioning service members and their family can do as they leave the armed forces, enter the corporate workforce, but also enter into the classroom for higher education, knowing that that SVA chapter is ready, willing, and able to connect them to their community. So Jarrett, with that, thank you so very much for joining me today.
Much appreciated, brother. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Compass Check. I've been your host, James Fitzgerald. Tune in next week when my guest will be Mary Beth Brueggemann, president of the Mission Continues.